Hi, I'm Plami, and in this episode of Plami's Thoughts On, I'm gonna be sharing my thoughts on a movie that I watched recently called Carriers. And if you don't know anything about this movie, it's basically a pandemic movie, which is funny to watch at this point in time. Maybe it would have been a little bit more fitting to watch it last year, but for some reason I just get to watch movies just uh, very rarely, not, or should I say not as frequently as I want to, as a lot of the things that I do on my channel happen to go exactly like that. I don't really get to upload the exact type of videos that I do as frequently as I want to, just because it just takes time to shift my focus from one kind of content to a different kind of content, and the same thing happens when wanting to watch something like a movie. I have to switch the gears in my head from doing content to focusing on enjoying a movie and then reviewing it later. But honestly, this movie, which is from 2009 and stars Chris Pine, yes, that Chris Pine who is in the Wonder Woman movies, it's actually a pretty good movie. Yeah, it's very gritty, it's very realistic, and it's genuinely good. I'm gonna get into what exactly is good about it in a little bit later, but yeah, it's not much, but it's good. The biggest problem that I feel like the movie has is just, for lack of a better term, the scale. That's one way you can call what is bad with it. And what I'm trying to go at is that, yes, everything that happened in the movie is gritty, it's good, it's super entertaining, and it feels like it's written very well. But it doesn't really feel like they do too much with the concept, and they don't have that much happening in the movie overall. It's a very small scale story, which is fine. It doesn't need to be big blockbuster or anything like that. I actually genuinely think that the fact that it's a more small scale story kind of helps it work better, because realistically, for somebody to take a movie like this seriously, it has to be a more of a small scale story, because if you go big blockbuster kind of thing, you just have to go over the top and focus on not the things that really make the movie good. It's very hard, in my opinion, to make a good blockbuster zombie movie or a pandemic movie, or just a post-apocalyptic movie like this one. Even though in this case it's not really post-apocalyptic, it's more like a post-pandemic kind of movie, because in this case the virus in the movie is not a zombie virus. There's no zombies or anything like that, but it's a virus that very easily infects you and kills you. And all things considered, this could so easily slip into being canon to something like The Walking Dead, if I gotta be honest, because it has the exact same feel, it is the exact same in terms of the scale of the story it's trying to tell. It feels like somebody employed the same kind of writing that The Walking Dead used to do, more like in the early 3 or 4 seasons, because it then shifted a little bit as the season went along. But it's very similar in terms of feel to the first few seasons of The Walking Dead, which definitely amplified how much I actually enjoyed this movie. And I gotta mention, the reason why I decided to watch this movie now is not only because we are still in the pandemic, and just I feel like it's interesting to watch these kind of movies right now and see how the perspective of living through a pandemic changes your perspective on things. But also I decided to watch this movie because I remember watching it a long time ago, probably very soon after it was released, like in 2011, 2012, when I was a young teenager. And I remember loving it, and the one scene that I remember from this movie was the scene in which one of the characters almost falls in a pool. That's the one scene that I remember from it. And yeah, I enjoyed it again when we saw it, and it was definitely a very scary scene. Although it's not really a scary after being for us, for me as a viewer, after living through this pandemic, it's not really scarier, because the kind of pandemic that we were living through wasn't really as deadly or dangerous, I would say, as this. And it's not even that it wasn't deadly, because COVID was 100% deadly, but it's more that in the movie like this, because it obviously has to be a little bit more dramatized, you see all the blood and gore on the sick people's bodies. Well, with COVID, it's not really obvious on the surface how bad of a sickness it is, you know? So I think this is just another case of reality is more boring than fiction. Or sometimes more crazier, because we have also had that. But when it comes to darker stuff and more deadly stuff, in real life, reality is more boring than a movie. Because if COVID was as deadly and as obviously deadly, like you could see the effects of COVID on somebody as it is in this movie, I think people would have taken it more seriously. But because you don't really see anything, most people took it like, it's okay. But yeah, I don't want to repeat that word too many times because I don't want this video to get restricted or anything like that, so I'm gonna try not to mention it anymore because I've already mentioned it like 5 times at least. But yeah, at first when the movie started, I actually wasn't exactly sure how it's going to go because, again, I didn't really have too much of a memory of this movie. I just remember that one scene at the pool where the main character, who is played by Chris Pine, almost fell into pool, and I didn't really remember any of the context surrounding it. But at the beginning, I actually didn't realize that we were already in the post-apocalypse. I guess the sickness wasn't spread around. When we get to meet the father with the girl, is when I realized that, oh, we are already in the story, which I think actually works for the movie. As I said, it feels very much like a Walking Dead kind of story. It genuinely feels like this could have been an episode of The Walking Dead, and you wouldn't really feel the difference. Which is why, before we continue going forward, I think this movie is really good. So if you're interested in a virus outbreak kind of movie, definitely check this one out. And from what I've seen, people agree with me that this is actually a pretty decent movie. It's nothing crazy, because as I said, the scale of the movie kind of feels restrictive a little bit, because you're like, okay, so that's kind of the plot of the movie, not much else. Like, you feel like they could have done a more ambitious plot, but honestly, for what they did it really well. It's just that it is a little bit small scale, and it isn't really that much, how to say it, there's not much experimentation when it comes to the plots or anything. It's fairly stereotypical stuff, like exactly the kind of stuff that you would go for if you are writing this kind of story. Like, characters go to find a supposed cure for the virus, they find nothing, and all those stuff, you know? So yeah, definitely go and check it out. Yeah, going forward, there's gonna be a lot of spoilers. So yeah, at the beginning of the movie, when we open with the 4 main characters, I wasn't sure whether we were already in the pandemic. I thought they were just driving in some road in the middle of nowhere in America. But no, we were already during the outbreak, and they meet a father with his sick daughter who is asking for, I think it was gas or some kind of supplies he was asking for, but because they noticed that the girl was sick, and because they didn't want to get sick themselves, they had to quickly escape from him, which ended up causing them to break their car. So because they weren't willing to help the dad and the daughter, you can kind of interpret that their unwillingness to help them caused them to break their car, so they afterwards need another vehicle because their vehicle is unable to move at this point because they broke something underneath. I'm not sure what it was. So their only choice is to go back and take the car and use it, which is exactly what they do. But obviously the father with his daughter isn't willing to let the car without him, so they tape around the, I think it was the luggage part of the car. I don't remember what's the word for it in English, but like the far end of the car in the back, they kind of tape it off so they're on their own, the father and the daughter, while they disinfect the rest of the car so it's safe for them to drive. And they go to a place that is there's supposedly some kind of a cure for this virus, which, by the way, I haven't mentioned exactly the symptoms, but apparently is it any kind of touch, or I don't think it's any kind of touch, but if you breathe it, it's a very easily spread virus, by the way. It can live on surfaces for like 24 hours and all those stuff. And it's a very scary virus because when it gets to you, it slowly starts to kill you as you start to bleed from everywhere, and you don't even really die, which is why it kind of feels like it leans towards some of the zombie stuff. Because we have a scene later on when they're looking for gas from an abandoned car and looking for supplies in general in the car, and there's still a person in that car. So when one of our main characters, Danny, goes into the car to check for supplies, the person who was sitting in the car, who you would think he was dead, was actually alive. But it is a pretty obvious jump scare, and it's not really even a jump scare, not the cliche jump scare that you have in most horror movies nowadays. Like, there's no wah kind of jump scare. It's just like, oh, he wakes up and our main character is startled. That's kind of what the jump scare is. But with the way that the person who is sick but still alive, who is very sick but still alive, kind of looks like zombies in The Walking Dead, especially in the early days. So I could definitely see these being like, you could easily, with almost no problem, slid this into being a prequel to The Walking Dead. And honestly, that kind of makes me love this movie that much more, because it deals with a lot of the similar stuff that The Walking Dead deals. This is basically what The Walking Dead is, just stretched into a season compared to a few episodes. I mean, compared to like an hour and 20 minutes, because I think this movie is like 90 minutes, maybe, I think. Give me a second to check. Oh, it's 85 minutes, I was close. But yeah, so where were we? Oh yeah, they're driving to this place where supposedly there is some cure for this. And when they go there, obviously there's almost nobody in that school or a hospital or whatever it is. They just find... I'm sorry. They find one doctor with a bunch of children, which is what kind of makes me feel like this movie is fairly stereotypical. Oh, sorry, I'm blanked. Which is why it's a fairly stereotypical movie, because this is kind of exactly what you're gonna go for, because you're not going to reveal to the viewers that there's a cure like 30 minutes into the movie. If you do that, it's obviously gonna be a fake out, because you wouldn't cure the sickness that the movie is about in like the first 30 minutes. So it's very stereotypical that they're gonna go in this dark direction where the doctor, because the cure actually doesn't work, ends up killing the children. It's dark and it makes sense, but it feels fairly cliche, you know? It's still very entertaining, but it's nothing really too original, you know? It's stuff that you could easily come up with if you're writing this kind of story yourself, which is fine by me. But that's one of the reasons for me why the first season of The Walking Dead I don't like at all, almost, I would say. There's things that I like about the season, small things, but for the most part, that's one of the things that causes me to hate that first season. In addition to the fact that so many people seem to love the first season and say that it's the best season of The Walking Dead, when it's bullshit, in my opinion. Even if we don't consider the fact that it's fairly stereotypical, just like this movie, as a negative, but consider it as a positive, it's still nowhere near the best season of The Walking Dead. At best, it's somewhere in the middle, you know? The first episode is really good, but the rest of the season is eh. But yeah, again, I'm getting sidetracked, so let's get back to the movie. So the place they go to with the doctor is obviously not gonna work. The father is not gonna be able to cure his daughter. So they go, while they're inside, the girlfriend of the main character, I think her name was Bobby? Oh, that's where I know her from. I knew that the actress was super familiar to me. Apparently the actress for Bobby is the actress who plays the main female character in the Adventures of Rocky and Bullwinkle movie. I don't know if you have seen it, but I have seen that movie, and I was wondering when I watched that movie and when I actually watched the Nostalgia Critic review of that movie, where the hell did I see this actress? Why did she seem so familiar? So I think because I'm pretty sure I watched this movie Carriers earlier. I watched it in like 2010 or 2011, and then I watched the Adventures of Rock and Bullwinkle movie in like 2013, 2014. That's where I saw her. I saw her first in this movie, and then I saw her from in Adventures of Rock and Bullwinkle. So that's interesting. And also apparently she's in Looper, which is a really cool sci-fi time travel movie, which you should definitely check out if you haven't. And I might do a review of it at some point, but we'll see about that. So yeah, while the guys and the other girl are inside looking for the doctor, the little girl, the daughter of the man, and Bobby are staying in the car, and she takes care of her while keeping an eye on her. But she starts to choke because that's something that the sickness causes to you. It causes you to choke on your blood, I believe. So she obviously is scared because she doesn't want to catch the virus. So at first she just tries to calm the kid down and find a way to help her without going near her. But obviously her goodness gets the better of her, so she breaks the seal that they made and goes to help her, but the girl ends up coughing blood on her face, which immediately sends her into panic because she is now infected. She knows that, and at the same time the guys and the father are coming back from the hospital, so she quickly tries to hide the fact that she even opened that up and that she got coughed on, even though it's very obvious that she's doing something in the back of the car. So I don't understand how they wouldn't have seen it, but sure, I'm gonna buy that. And again, as in typical fashion for these kind of stories, she doesn't reveal the fact that she's sick, although she does try to keep her distance from everybody, which I still am okay with, but I feel like again, she probably should have told them, but I can kind of understand why she didn't, because she herself didn't know whether she necessarily was sick, and until she told it to them, I feel like she didn't want to admit it to herself that she was sick. At least that's how I felt for her in those moments. I felt like until she told them, it was possible for it to swing either way, that she didn't get sick or she got sick, I don't know. So maybe she herself didn't want to reveal to them that she was sick as a way to not admit it to herself. But obviously, she does get sick. And in the meantime, they go to the place where Chris Pine almost falls into pool, which is like some kind of a golf resort or whatever. I think they go there for some supplies or just because they can, because that's one of the good things about the apocalypse, and that is just being able to go wherever you want into old abandoned places like malls or golf courses and just go ham and do whatever you want. That's one of the good aspects of a zombie apocalypse or just a post-apocalyptic society. If you manage to survive being raped, murdered, starvation, and all those bad things, you have a world to do whatever you wanted. So I guess look on the bright side. But yeah, that's always the thing that I've really enjoyed seeing in this kind of stuff, because it's something everybody would want to do, you know? And even though this is not like a comedy post-apocalyptic movie like Zombieland, it still does a very similar thing to them, where they go on the golf course and just fuck around. But before that, they obviously go around the place to see whether there's anybody there. And while Chris Pine whose name in this movie, by the way, is Brian, so I guess I should go by Brian, is looking in the pool and poking it with, I don't know what the thing is, but let's say poking it with a stick to see if there's anything in it. A guy with a hazmat suit ends up showing up above the water, which startles Brian, and he almost falls in the pool, and that's still one of the most memorable scenes in the movie, in my opinion, because he is literally stuck on the bottom side of the jumping pad of a pool, and that is pretty terrifying. I don't really know how exactly one can manage to not touch the water while getting back up. But he manages to do that, and he doesn't get sick. But obviously at this time we already know that Bobby is most likely sick, so she kind of keeps her distance while her boyfriend thinks that he did something wrong, because he is a little bit of a douchebag, which he acknowledges throughout the movie. But later on, in a very cool scene between him and his brother, he shows why he is the way he is, and I'm gonna get into it. So they decide to fuck around and end up breaking some windows with golf balls. Also, in the meantime, Brian ends up crashing a golf cart, and he is sitting on the ground, and his girlfriend, who we already know is sick, is kinda standoffish towards him, and he tricks her into pulling her into the sand as well, and he ends up getting close to her and kissing her, which essentially dooms him because she is already sick. At this point now we know that he's most likely sick as well. While Danny and another girl, which is, I think her name is Kate. I think, I don't know for what reason they go in, but they go inside the building and look around. And I think that's when people start showing up, because it's dark, but I think when they were playing in the golf course, it was still pretty... It was kind of like mid to late day. I'm not sure, but what I remember happening afterwards is that they're looking in the building and there's somebody with a flashlight. Danny calls out his brother's name, Brian, but obviously that's not Brian. He doesn't respond, so they assume that it's somebody bad, and they go and try to hide. They grab knives. There's a kind of a tense scene, but I obviously knew that they weren't going to die, because after that, there's another scene that I remember from when I first watched this movie, which was that it's people in a hazmat suit which kind of used the golf course as a place to stay that was safe, or at least one of them was there, and that one person who was also part of this hazmat suit group is the person who we found dead in the pool. And also, I completely forgot, sorry about that, but I completely forgot to talk about the earlier scene that I really liked, which was after they left the hospital, because I was a little too focused on talking about Bobby and kind of get sidetracked. But there's that scene afterwards, after they come out of the hospital, where the daughter of the man needs to go to the toilet, but both we, the audience, and the dad and the rest of the group know that the second that they are not in the car, that the dad and the daughter are not in the car and are not close to the car, the douchebag Brian, who is the big brother played by Chris Pine, is going to leave them behind, because their discussion and decision was that their obligation was that they have to drive him to this place with the doctor and nothing else. Afterwards, they could take the car and go away. So everybody in this situation, including the viewer, knows exactly what's gonna happen. So the father tries to talk to his daughter and tell her to just go on her own to the toilet, but she isn't able to, so he just grabs and carries her to it, knowing that if he leaves the car, they're gonna leave them behind. And the asshole that Brian is obviously leaves her behind, and that is pretty much honestly what dooms them, in a way. And when you think about it, you know what, I'm gonna talk about it a little later, because it's more of an equivalent thing in a later scene. But this is pretty much what sets them up for failure, because I feel like this movie kinda ends up saying that if you're not nice in the apocalypse, you're not gonna get people being nice to you either. Because after we're done with the golf course, which we end up meeting this group with the hazmat suits, and they want to keep the girls for obvious sexist and fucking animalistic kind of reasons. But the second they find out that Bobby is infected, which is when we also get confirmed that she is infected, they let them all go. And afterwards, after talking about it, Danny and Brian is forced to leave Bobby behind because she's infected and they cannot keep her with them. And it's in a very sad and emotional scene, especially for Brian, who, yes, we know that he's been a douchebag throughout this movie and that he's exactly the kind of person to always deny it until, or at least I feel like he's the kind of person who will deny it until the last second. He is forced to kick her out of the car, essentially, which kind of reminds me of Kenny from Telltale's The Walking Dead, which, by the way, if you're watching my gaming videos after I'm done with Far Cry 3, which is probably going to take me 2 or 3 weeks from now to finish, I'm going to start my replay of all 4 seasons of Telltale's The Walking Dead, as kind of like a celebration, an anniversary for the 2 years since I started my YouTube channel. So, and also because I just want to play it again, and because the first playthrough that I did of the 4th season when it was released in 2019 is dog shit, and I had a lot of problems, and it was so hard. I wasn't good at editing. It was a terrible video, so I kind of want to remake it, so might as well just play all of them. So yeah, this character of Brian, as I said, reminds me of Kenny from Telltale's The Walking Dead, who has a very similar sentiment where he's always a little bit of a douche and he's willing to do the things that other people aren't, but when it comes to something close to him, he would be the last person to want to do that. So I feel like in that scene here, Brian kind of split away from that kind of character that Kenny is, because I feel like for the most part they were very similar, but in that moment their characters split. Kenny from Telltale's The Walking Dead wasn't willing to do the things that you need to do when it's somebody you care about. Well, Brian had to do it. He knew he had to do it. It was tough, but he did the right thing and left her behind, which it's kind of a boring way, in my opinion, to take her out of the movie. Because I enjoyed this cast of characters. I found all of them entertaining, and I feel like it's kind of lame. Like, yeah, it makes sense that they will leave her behind, but it's kind of lame. I don't know. It's just like she dies off screen, essentially, and I don't know. That doesn't really leave as much of an impact as I wish it did, because when we get Brian's death, it's much more impactful and emotional. But yeah, in one of the scenes afterwards, maybe even literally the scene afterwards, we get our group of surviving characters, which is Brian, Danny, and Kate, driving down the road without gas and meeting another car driving towards them. So guess what happens in that moment? Brian swerves the car to the side, so the people in the other car are forced to stop, basically doing the exact same thing that the father earlier in the movie did when he was asking our main characters for supplies and they weren't willing to give it to him, so they swerved and got away. While in this situation, it's Brian and our group who need supplies, and there's a group of people who are not willing to give them the supplies. But in this situation, Brian, who is fucking insane, decides to shoot them with a gun. I don't remember where he got the gun. I think it's a gun that they had right from the beginning. But it's interesting how it's an exact comparison to the beginning of the movie, that they got themselves into the exact same situation that they were in the beginning of the movie, but it was just reversed. So I feel like the movie is kind of trying to say that because of the action that they took in that situation there, it's why they got in the situation here. Because in the beginning, if they just stopped and gave supplies to the father, he could have taken his daughter and they could have not gotten sick, not have to deal with it, and just continue on their merry ways to Turtle Beach. But no, they had to swerve away, break their car, and take the father and daughter to the place, inevitably getting the others sick. It's kind of interesting how it's like a butterfly effect, you know? And this is another thing that reminds me a lot of The Walking Dead, because there are certain moments in The Walking Dead that I can't exactly pinpoint specifically all of them, but there are some really cool moments in The Walking Dead where you can notice a butterfly effect of if this action didn't happen, then this action wouldn't have happened, then this action wouldn't have happened, then this action wouldn't have happened. Like the one major one, and by the way, spoilers for season 6 of The Walking Dead. That's the major one that I've noticed and I've seen and I've thought about, butterfly effect. But in season 6 of The Walking Dead, Morgan decides to keep one of the people who invaded the place, the community that everybody was staying in, and try to change him and make him a good person and not the villain that he was. By him doing that, later on that person escapes the cell that Morgan had built for him and captures one of the people living in the community. It was a doctor that he captured. So as he was trying to get out of the community, which was swarmed by walkers, aka zombies, he ends up getting bitten, but he ends up sacrificing himself to save the doctor from the zombies, and thus the doctor is able to get to the medical place of the community, where she is able to save another character who ends up getting shot in the face during that whole mayhem. So the bad guy being saved saves that doctor character from dying, which allows her to save that other characters who get shot. So that's kind of like a little bit of a butterfly effect that I got reminded of. But yeah, so we have in that scene Brian shooting I think it was a couple of old ladies who got shot, and one of them also actually shoots him in the leg, so he doesn't go unscathed in that situation. And obviously his brother is frustrated about that, because we've shown throughout the movie that Brian is the tough older brother, while Danny is the more sweet and good and nicer younger brother. So obviously he has a problem with what Brian just did. But we have a very nice confrontation between the brothers, in which we learn that before the movie even started, when the viral pandemic first broke out, it was Brian who had to go to their parents' house with their parents being sick and get the gun from their room, which I guess explains that the gun that they had it for the whole movie from the beginning. And that he later had to lie to Danny that their parents were already dead, because obviously he knew that if Danny knew that they were alive, he would have been hurt. So it's a very nice and intense interaction between the two characters, which kind of adds a little bit more dimension to Brian's character, because for most of the movie you think of him as the asshole, as the tough douchebag. But in this situation you understand that pressure and the things that he has to do as the older brother who has to take care of his younger brother. He's not able to be as carefree and nice as his younger brother. But ultimately, if he was, then all these things wouldn't have happened. So I guess he's wrong. I guess that's what the movie is trying to tell us. But anyway, so obviously because Brian gets shot, he's not really able to do the things that he usually does. He's very weak, and at the same time the sickness is also starting to get to him, which at the time the characters don't really know that yet. They still think that it's his leg that is causing him to be super tired, because he lost blood and all those stuff. So then we have a little bit of a sequence which again reminds me of The Walking Dead, because in like one of the first few episodes, I think it's literally the first episode of The Walking Dead, we have Rick going to a house for supplies, or at least trying to look for people and to get a car from at a place, and we see somebody inside a room with their head blown out. And this is kind of a similar situation where we don't really have a person with their head blown out, but Danny has to get into a house to look for supplies, and I think guns or whatever, or no, it was pills for his brother's injuries that he had to look for. And once he climbed in the window, there was a woman with a shotgun standing near the window, and she was dead. But because of the sickness, the way the sickness is, you don't really know when they're dead and they're not. You can't really trust it per se, and you gotta be careful for them not to touch you, or for anything off of them to not get into your mouth, because this sickness is apparently very easy to get contagious. It's very contagious. So he gets inside, and again, in like a mirror to what his brother had to do, he has to fend off a dog in a room, I think with somebody dead in a bed, so he's kind of reminded of what his brother had to do to their parents and in their parents' room. And in that situation, also Danny has to shoot a dog that attacks him. Which I just fucking hate when movies do that. Like, I get it, the dog attacked him, so he had to do that, but stop killing dogs. It's just a cheap way to create an emotion in me. I hate it. I hate when movies do that. Just don't kill dogs, okay? Or I'm gonna send John Wick up your ass. So yeah, in the following scene we have Kate and Danny find out that Brian is obviously sick, and as we've seen so far how they deal with everybody, they put him in the back of the car and they are driving to a place. And already in that situation we know what Danny is kind of thinking that he has to do. He thinks that he's gonna have to either put down his brother or just leave him behind, which is kind of what they try to do. But the one thing that confuses me is how willing or eager or just thinking about it Danny is. Because like Brian, yes, he knew that his girlfriend Bobby had to be left behind because she was otherwise gonna get all of them sick, and it would just be bad to see her suffer so much while she's dying. But at the same time, he showed struggle in what he had to do. I don't really think Danny really showed that. I don't know, it just kind of weirded me out. Okay, so he's your brother. You obviously show that you care about him, but then you're like very, very eager to let him stay and leave him behind. And I don't know, that just kind of confused me a little bit, because even in the following scene where they're camping in the middle of nowhere trying to leave Brian behind while he is sleeping, and again, Danny shows no emotion whatsoever, and I don't want to blame that on the actor necessarily, because I don't think the actor is bad. But I don't know, it really, really confused me. It felt weird. Like, I'm supposed to be rooting for that guy who is willing to leave his brother with no bad feelings about it whatsoever. Like, again, I don't want to say the actor is bad, because he seems like a good actor. His name is Lou Taylor Pucci, by the way. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like maybe it was just like the way the character was written. It just felt like not how I would feel in that situation. Because in that situation, I felt bad that Brian was going to die and that he was sick. Like, at the very least, I would feel bad and kind of point a gun at his head and put him down, because that's the more merciful way to go, rather than just letting him die from the sickness. And again, that's kind of what Danny ends up doing, because he ends up shooting his brother, because his brother says that he either has to put him down and get the keys from him, or get him with them in the car. And obviously Danny cannot take him with them, so he has to put him down. But again, the movie doesn't really show Danny struggling with it. It kind of makes you feel that Danny's like a sociopath or something, when for most of the movie we saw him as the nice guy. So I feel like they could have done a little better with that detail of it, but it was fine. It was impactful, not necessarily emotional, although it was a little emotional, but it was mostly a very impactful scene of him having to put down his brother and then burn his body. And obviously at the end of the movie, we have Danny and Kate get to the beach and the movie ends. So yeah, it's a solid movie. It's a solid movie about a pandemic, and I think if you are into this kind of movie and you want to watch that kind of movie with like a viral pandemic with a more realistic and gritty take on it, I think this is a movie that is definitely worth your watch and worth your time. But don't necessarily expect anything big. I mean, I've already explained what the movie is to you, so you're not gonna really expect anything else, but like, it's nothing really big. It's very small scale. It could easily be just an episode of The Walking Dead, and you wouldn't really even bat an eye that much. Especially if it is in the early seasons, like season 2. It could easily slide in season 2, and you wouldn't have any problem with it. But yeah, in terms of its rating, I think I'm going to give it an 8.1 out of 10. Because, as I said, I think it's good, and for what it's trying to do, I think it fucking nails it. But the thing is, as much as I enjoy this small scale story that it has, I love it because I'm already used to these kind of stories from The Walking Dead. So the fact that it's so similar to that, for me, it's easy to slide myself into this movie and just enjoy it for what it is, and not really be bothered that it's not a big budget blockbuster or anything like that. I'm just okay for it feeling like a TV show episode and nothing else, because I've seen a TV show with episodes that are very similar in feel to this. But I feel like maybe necessarily if you're not familiar with The Walking Dead, maybe I can see somebody feeling a little underwhelmed by this movie, because even for a little bit, I'm like, well, that's it? Because I feel like they could have done a little bit more. But again, I think it works really well because it is a very small scale story that is focused on the characters and not on the plot. The plot is just a backdrop. But yeah, I think if you're a fan of The Walking Dead, you definitely should check this movie out, because it feels like a prequel to it in a way. But yeah, I think this is it. So hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, leave a like, subscribe. Also check out the description to my Twitter if you don't follow me there, and to my Wattpad where I post my stories, because in addition to doing all these videos to my channel, I'm also a writer. And if you want to enjoy my stories, or you simply enjoy my videos, you can head over to Patreon, where you can pledge support and help get the channel going, help support me so I can keep writing the stories you enjoy. But if you don't want to do it, that's completely fine. You can still help me out in other ways, like liking this video, subscribing, and especially sharing this video with somebody who you think might enjoy it. And I think it's pretty much it for this video, so hopefully I'm gonna see you in the next one. Bye!